Now, many of the traits and habits of these cowboy tribes of Rhodesia were those of Neanderthals, but their cranial capacity and limb bones are indistinguishable from those of modern man. Now, the cowboy tribes used Homo sapiens tool-making techniques, and they developed pressure flaking. And they evolved to Cro-Magnon Homo sapiens tribes around 40,000 years ago. Now, they created a very fine, let me see if I have any pictures of them. No, I don't. Not yet. Okay, they created very fine leaf-shaped points that have been named the still-bait tool-making industry. And they merged with native populations, and pressure flaking techniques spread all over South Africa, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Libya. Now, the name Egypt originated with Greeks. Now, African people called themselves Kemi or Kamites or Hamites, which means the black people. Now, they called their land the country of Kem or Kam or Ham, which literally meant the black land. Now, it originally, the black land was originally all the territorial or non-mountainous areas of the Oblate region. That's what, you know, it was in the warm part. And in other words, the black land was the kingdom of Atlantis. Now, around 40,000 years ago, Cro-Magnons established an administration center or capital in Egypt to teach the growing, mutating populations of Atlantis. Now, the main thing they mean when they mean growing, mutating, means that they could change, they could become black, or they could become white. They could be part of the mountain tribes, or they could be part of the native population. Now, the Turin papyrus is an incomplete, damaged fragment of a hieroglyphic manuscript that was written during the reign of Pharaoh Ramses II the Great, around 1280 BC. Now, that manuscript is currently housed in the Egyptian Museum in Turin, Italy. It is considered to be the most detailed and reliable of all existing Egyptian king lists. It gives the names of kings, their ruling years, the months and days, and it lists them by dynasties that are divided into major historical eras. Now, the Turin papyrus lists 10 gods who ruled Egypt for 23,200 years, 10 people. And the gods, or they called them Naturo, which means gods, were accredited with extended lifespans, as are some Atlanteans, and Edgar Cayce talks about people with long lives, and the Bible mentions a lot of people with these long lives. So the Turin papyrus essentially states that the Naturo, or gods, began to rule Egypt around 38,000 years ago. Now, Ptolemy I was the first king of the Macedonian dynasty that ruled Egypt between 305 and 282 BC. That was when Cleopatra was ruling. She was part of the Macedonian dynasty. Now, the Pharaoh, Ptolemy I, the king of the Macedonian pharaoh, commissioned Manetho, an Egyptian priest, to write a history of Egypt. Now, Manetho had access to all the different records and the archives of ancient Egypt, and while only fragments of his writings survive, but they include a list of Egyptian kings. And Manetho gave a figure of 36,525 years for the entire duration of the civilization of Egypt, from the time of the gods down to the end of the last dynasty of mortal kings. Now, what it breaks down to is he essentially said that the gods began ruling Egypt around 39,000 years ago. Now, that's what the Turin papyrus says. It says 38,000, and that's when Atlanteans started ruling Egypt. So now, several current day noted anthropologists state, one of them states, I think this was Carl Sagan stated, Some 35 to 40,000 years ago, while the worm glaciation was still at its height, the Neanderthal race was replaced in Europe, apparently rather suddenly, by men whose bones were structurally like our own. These men were invaders from outside Europe, since they brought with them a culture quite different from that of the Neanderthalians. They, the Cro-Magnons, were again physically far from uniform. The Cro-Magnon people who left their remains in central France were tall, some almost 6 feet, and of athletic physique. The fossil Grimaldi people in southern France were like some Negroids now living in Africa. Now, this is in Europe at least, the picture is fairly clear. An ape-like breed in possession of one well-defined cultural tradition was directly confronted and dispossessed by men of modern type with a totally different material culture. Two breeds, we think two species, met face to face, and their faces were strikingly unlike. Now the Neanderthals were Caucasian, and the Cro-Magnons were black. Cro-Magnons had an average brain volume of about 1,500 cc's. That is more than 100 cc's larger than that of present-day races. Most anthropologists guess that we are not descended from Neanderthals, and may not be from Cro-Magnons either. But their existence raises a question. Who were these fellas? What were their accomplishments? Cro-Magnons were also very large. Some specimens were well over 6 feet tall. Now the 7 Canary Islands lie about 60 miles west of the African coast, opposite the extreme south of Morocco. That should be right about, Morocco would be right about here. And here are the 7 Canary Islands. So we're right here. Okay. They're rugged, mountainous areas with evidence of volcanic action present almost everywhere. Now, around 40,000 years ago, the Canary Islands were part of a solid landmass where Cro-Magnons of Pisidia built a temple complex or scholastic center to teach the mixed-race populations of France, Spain, Northern Africa, and England. Now, the temples functioned as schools, medical centers, courthouses, etc. And they were originally administered by goddesses or female scientists from the kingdom of Atlantis. Now, the island of Tenerife was an area that was a major coordinating center. And most of the skulls that they found in the Canary Islands are those of the Cro-Magnon type. Now, Cro-Magnons, historians state that Negroid Cro-Magnons settled at Grimaldi Cave and Menton on the French Riviera. They brought with them what anthropologists call the fully developed Aurignacian culture. Now, between the first and second cold periods of the fourth glaciation, when the climate was favorable, a single migrating Cro-Magnon race traveled in groups of 10 to 100 individuals to Lebanon, Syria, Israel, North and South Africa, and Western Europe. An encyclopedia passage states, the Aurignacian culture, which was almost equally widespread, but more coherent in individuality throughout its whole extent, leaves no doubt that it was spread by a single migrating race of Cro-Magnons. Now, extensive research has shown that over 200 European caves have paintings and carvings that date from the Ice Age era, and over 90% of those caves are in the Franco-Cantabrian region. That's right here. It's kind of a mountainous region. Okay, there are caves that are right there. And those caves have cave art. They were regions of open tundra or steppe environments during the last ice age, and it supported some of the highest concentrations of human and animal populations. Now, worm Neanderthals had concentrated heavily in the caves of France. And so now Cro-Magnons from Atlantis concentrated in those areas. Now, Aurignacians taught the manufacture of paint and the use of cave and home art as a means of writing and communication. They used ochre, oxides of iron, oxides of magnesium, and burnt bone or soot. And they obtained absolutely permanent pigments that are still around. They can still go see. They've got some pictures of cave art. They range from chocolate to light red, orange, yellow, brown, blue, and black. Now, sometimes they even took the sticks of mineral pigments and used them like crayons. Okay, now they taught the native population, these mixed race people who were descendants of the slaves and the worm Neanderthals, they taught them to focus on hunting a single species of game. And the single species focused upon varied in different regions. In France, the focus was on reindeer and wild horses. Now in Central and Eastern Europe, it was on bison, mammoth, and wild ass. In Mediterranean Europe, red deer, ibex, and chamois were systematically hunted. Now most historians think that they used this system in order to prevent species from being hunted to extinction. But it also taught the natives the cycles of nature and the characteristics of totems. Now they taught the native people the manufacture and use of tools for specialized purposes. New types of tools were introduced for working bone and antler. Their manufacturers included scrapers, burins, points, knives of bone and antler, harpoons, fish spears, spear throwers, and needles. They taught the manufacture of clothes and tents from animal hides. They established remarkably uniform tool-making culture traditions from southern Israel to Spain. Historians state that their tools tended to be concentrated in narrow valleys or against cliff walls that contained clusters of neighboring shelters. Okay, now fossil skeletons of Cro-Magnons of Rhodesia were frequently found with particularly fine shell and feather headdresses, necklaces, bracelets, leg bands, and pendants were used to denote their tribal heritage or genetic heritage and affiliations. That's when Africans began the elaborate decorations or what would you call it, markings and what they were trying, and leg bracelets. They were trying to distinguish themselves or to show other Native people their heritage. And